On a cold winter day in 1963, in the basement of Copenhagen Municipal Hospital, 11-year-old Per Wennick was strapped to a metal chair, his wrists and ankles firmly bound by leather restraints. Doctors attached electrodes to his chest and handed him a pair of headphones, which suddenly erupted with disturbing screams and noise. This innocent Danish boy had no idea that he had become part of a vast and dark plan, a secret project of the United States Central Intelligence Agency CIA, codenamed MKUltra. This program, which began in the 1950s and continued for nearly 20 years, was one of the most secretive and controversial intelligence operations of the Cold War era. Across the globe, thousands of innocent civilians were unwittingly drawn into human experimentation conducted in the name of national security. From American prisons to Canadian hospitals, from Danish orphanages to secret facilities in East Asia, MKUltra's tentacles extended to an unimaginable breadth. This article will reveal the origins, development, main experimental content, and profound impact of this dark program on its victims and society, exploring what we have ultimately lost in the balance between national security and basic human rights. Origins in the shadow of the Cold War, the birth of MKUltra was deeply rooted in the fear and paranoia of the early Cold War. In 1949, following the Soviet Union's successful test of an atomic bomb, the Cold War between the United States and the USSR entered a heated phase. After the outbreak of the Korean War in 1950, American intelligence began receiving disturbing reports. Captured American soldiers in Korea and China appeared to have been brainwashed, publicly condemning the United States and praising communism. These reports triggered panic within the American intelligence community. The CIA feared that the Soviet Union and China might have mastered some advanced mind control technology. If such technology were used on American agents or high-level government officials, the consequences would be unimaginable. It was against this backdrop that in 1951, a chemist named Sidney Gottlieb walked into CIA headquarters. Gottlieb was a peculiar figure. He walked with a limp, stuttered when he spoke, but had an almost obsessive knowledge of poisons and drugs. Allen Dulles, then CIA director, made a bold request. "We need a method that can erase a person's mind like deleting a tape, and then write new instructions." Gottlieb's response was brief and cold. "Drugs, electroshock, sensory deprivation give me resources, and I can do it." Gottlieb's inspiration came partly from experiments conducted by Nazi and Japanese war criminals during World War II. Through America's Operation Paperclip, many Nazi scientists were secretly brought to the United States, and the data from their concentration camp human experiments became the foundation for CIA research. Gottlieb once wrote in his notes, "The first step in destroying consciousness is to find the critical point of the human spirit." On April 13, 1953, Dulles officially approved the MKUltra program. MK represented the CIA's Technical Services Division, and Ultra meant top secret. The core objective of this program was singular: to achieve control over the human mind through drugs, psychological manipulation, and other means. The death of Olson, the program's first victim, the shadow of MKUltra, first fell on the CIA's own scientists. In November 1953, at a seminar at Deep Creek Lake in Maryland, biologist Frank Olson was secretly dosed with LSD in his drink by Gottlieb after questioning the ethics of the project. 7 days later, Olson fell to his death from the 10th floor of the Statler Hotel in New York. The official investigation ruled it a suicide, but later declassified documents and autopsy reports showed that Olson's blood contained lethal doses of LSD, and his body had injuries inconsistent with a fall. The CIA paid hush money to Olson's family and forged psychiatric evaluation reports claiming he committed suicide due to work pressure. It wasn't until the congressional investigations of 1975 that the truth began to surface, forcing President Ford to apologize to the Olson family. Olson's death was an early warning of MKUltra's dark nature, but it did not stop the program's expansion. Instead, over the next 20 years, the project developed into a vast network comprising 149 sub-projects involving more than 80 institutions, including renowned universities, hospitals, and research institutes. Global Experimental Network. To avoid legal and moral responsibility, the CIA established a complex cover system. They provided funding to research institutions through fictitious foundations such as the Human Ecology Fund, and many scientists involved in the research were unaware that their work would ultimately be used for the CIA's secret project. MKUltra experiments can be roughly divided into 3 categories. 1. Drug experiments, searching for truth serums and controlled drugs. LSD, lysergic acid diethylamide, became the core research subject of MKUltra. This powerful hallucinogen, accidentally discovered by Swiss chemist Albert Hofmann in the 1940s, attracted intense interest from the CIA due to its powerful mental effects. Gottlieb spent $240,000 equivalent to $2.5 million in 2023 purchasing LSD globally, even requesting pharmaceutical companies to secretly develop improved versions. In facilities such as Kentucky State Prison and Atlanta Federal Penitentiary, inmates were told that participating in medical research could reduce their sentences, but in reality, they were injected with large doses of LSD and other experimental drugs. One psychiatric patient was continuously injected with LSD for 174 days, ultimately losing all memory and language ability. Even more disturbing was that many ordinary citizens also became experimental subjects without their knowledge. In San Francisco's North Beach District, the CIA operated a special brothel codenamed Operation Midnight Climax. Prostitutes were hired to lure clients and secretly add LSD to their drinks, while CIA agents behind one-way mirrors recorded the reactions of these unwitting individuals. This operation continued for nearly a decade, with an estimated hundreds of civilians being drugged without their knowledge. 2. Sensory deprivation and psychological manipulation. The Montreal Nightmare. At the Allen Memorial Institute of McGill University in Montreal, Canada, psychiatrist Dr. Ewan Cameron received over $1 million in funding from the CIA through the Human Ecology Fund to conduct so-called psychic driving experiments. Cameron's treatment method included 3 phases. First, depatterning, destroying the patient's existing thought patterns through LSD, electroshock, and sensory deprivation. Then psychic driving, attempting to implant new thoughts through repetitive messaging, and finally testing, evaluating the effectiveness of this reprogramming. The victims of these experiments were primarily ordinary patients suffering from mild depression, anxiety, or postpartum depression. They were told this was an innovative therapy, unaware they had become victims of CIA mind control experiments. Many victims suffered lifelong mental and physical harm after the experiments, and some even committed suicide. In 1957, a 28-year-old Canadian woman named Esther was admitted to the Allen Institute for Postpartum Depression. Over the next 8 months, she was injected with LSD daily, forced to wear headphones playing negative messages, and subjected to multiple electroshock treatments. When she was finally taken home by her husband, she could no longer recognize her family, was unable to control her bodily functions, and had regressed intellectually to the level of a young child. Her child was born with severe brain damage, likely related to the drugs used during the experiments. 3. Military applications. The soldiers of Edgewood, the military branch of MK-Ultra, operated primarily at the Edgewood Arsenal in Maryland. Here, over 7,000 American soldiers became subjects of chemical and psychological warfare experiments. Ostensibly, these experiments were to test protective equipment and train soldiers to respond to chemical attacks, but the actual purpose was to study how to control soldier behavior or disrupt enemy morale through chemical means. Soldiers were injected with LSD, BZ, a powerful hallucinogen, and diluted versions of nerve agents, with researchers recording their reactions and paying special attention to those exhibiting extreme behavior or suggestibility. These experiments resulted in at least 1,000 soldiers developing serious mental illnesses, with dozens committing suicide. Many continued to suffer from hallucinations, paranoia, and depression long after their discharge. MK-Ultra's tentacles even extended to children. In 1961, American psychologist Sarnoff Mednick established an academic cooperation relationship with Danish professor Fini Schulsinger. On the surface, they were researching the genetic factors of schizophrenia, but in reality, this project was a sub-project of MK-Ultra, aimed at studying how to predict and control the behavior of at-risk populations. 311 Danish children were selected to participate in this research, most of them orphans or from troubled families. Each child received only 16 kroner, about $1.50, as a participation fee. The experiment continued for nearly a decade, during which vast amounts of data were collected from electroencephalograms to behavioral patterns, from intelligence tests to drug responses. This data was sent to the United States, becoming part of the CIA's psychological warfare research. Perwenick was one of these children. Every month, he had to go to the hospital for a series of tests, psychological assessments, physical examinations, behavioral analyses. As he grew older, the tests became increasingly complex, sometimes even including mild electric shocks and drug injections. It wasn't until 2010, when a documentary called The Experiment exposed this truth, that Perwenick realized he had been the subject of a secret experiment. By then 58 years old, he could still vividly recall those terrible tests. "They stole my childhood," Wennick said in the documentary, and worse, they stole my self-perception. "For years, I thought I had mental problems because those experiments made me anxious and suspicious. Now I know it wasn't my fault." In 1972, as the Watergate investigation deepened, the CIA feared MK-Ultra might face congressional scrutiny. CIA Director Richard Helms ordered the destruction of all related documents. In January 1973, Sidney Gottlieb personally supervised the document destruction process. It is estimated that about 90% of MK-Ultra files were burned or shredded. Gottlieb later testified to Congress, "There is no truth in ashes." In 1974, New York Times reporter Seymour Hersh published a series of investigative reports exposing the CIA's family jewels, multiple secret projects including MK-Ultra. This triggered strong public protest, and Congress subsequently established a special committee led by Senator Frank Church to investigate intelligence agency misconduct. In 1977, multiple MK-Ultra victims and former CIA employees testified at Senate hearings. The facts revealed at the hearings shocked America. Throughout its 20-year history, MK-Ultra involved at least 149 sub-projects, conducted experiments in more than 80 institutions, and the number of victims potentially reached tens of thousands. The death toll remains a mystery because most records were destroyed. In 1976, President Ford issued an executive order prohibiting U.S. intelligence agencies from conducting drug experiments and assassination operations. In 1977, President Carter further strengthened oversight of intelligence activities. However, the impact of MK-Ultra was far from over. Many victims and their families continued to seek justice. In the 1980s, a group of victims who had suffered experiments at Montreal's Allen Institute collectively sued the CIA and the Canadian government. In 1992, the Canadian government agreed to compensation, but the US government never formally acknowledged responsibility. Sidney Gottlieb himself never faced criminal charges for the MK Ultra project. After retirement, he kept bees and made goat cheese in rural New York State until his death in 1999 at the age of 80. Ironically, the CIA's efforts to control human minds through drugs indirectly gave birth to the psychedelic culture of the 1960s. LSD flowed from secret laboratories into the streets, becoming a symbol of the counterculture movement. Many Beat Generation writers and artists, such as Allen Ginsberg, Ken Kesey, and Robert Hunter, had been volunteers or victims of CIA LSD experiments. They later spread these experiences to the wider public through literary and artistic works. After participating in a CIA-funded study at Stanford University, Ken Kesey wrote One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, a work whose critique of mental institutions largely stemmed from his experiences in the experiments. Timothy Leary, a Harvard University psychology professor who initially participated in similar research, later became a major advocate of psychedelic culture, coining the famous slogan Turn On, Tune In, Drop Out. Modern echoes and ethical considerations. Although the MK Ultra program was terminated nearly half a century ago, its impact and the ethical questions it raised remain intimately relevant to us. During the War on Terror, reports about the CIA using enhanced interrogation techniques in overseas black sites reminded people of the shadow of MK Ultra. In 2020, allegations by Ukrainian parliamentarians that the US military was testing deadly viruses on soldiers in Kharkiv laboratories, though lacking solid evidence, once again raised concerns about secret human experimentation. The MK Ultra program raised a series of profound ethical questions. Where is the boundary between national security and basic human rights? What ethical guidelines should scientific research follow? How should the power of intelligence agencies be supervised and limited? These questions remain relevant today. The Nuremberg Code clearly stipulates that any human experimentation must obtain the informed consent of the subject. The existence of MK Ultra demonstrates that even in democratic societies, this fundamental principle can be trampled in the name of national security. This reminds us that protecting human rights and dignity requires continuous vigilance and institutional safeguards. The MK Ultra program represents a dark chapter in American intelligence activities during the Cold War era. It reflects the fear, paranoia, and moral failure of an era. Thousands of innocent civilians, from prisoners to patients, from soldiers to children, became victims of human experimentation conducted in the name of national security without their knowledge. Although most documents have been destroyed and the truth may never be fully revealed, surviving records and victim testimonies are sufficient to help us understand the scale and brutality of this program. The history of MK Ultra warns us that when power operates in secrecy, when science breaks free from ethical constraints, human dignity and fundamental rights face serious threats. While pursuing national security, we must be vigilant against actions that violate human rights in its name. As philosopher George Santayana said, those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. The history of MK Ultra should not be forgotten. It reminds us that protecting human dignity and fundamental rights is the fundamental responsibility of every democratic society.